As you can see, I'm currently on the road. We had such a nice day today. We spent 5 days in Pietrapertosa trying to get that one shot. And the day we leave, it's beautiful and sunny outside. So instead of going to our next destination, we decided we'd explore. So the idea is there are a couple really beautiful towns and most likely some other stuff to photograph. I wanted to be in the town that we just shot and spend time exploring the area around, but we didn't really have time because of the weather. So now I'm kind of just driving around to see if we can get a good shot of Castelmezzano, which is actually the neighboring town that shares the same mountain range. But we're in a mountain road, so I can't just hike. Since it's about a 30-minute drive between the towns, I can't hike between, so the best way that I can actually scout this is from the road. The original plan was to spend 2 nights in Castelmezzano so we could explore, but now, on the day that we're leaving, we only have a few hours to scout it, find a spot, and set up to shoot. So what I'm doing is using my time by driving to different vantage points rather than walking because it's much faster and easier with all these mountain roads. This is just around the corner where I pulled off the road. This is the first real view of the town where it's starting to look like something I want to photograph. The big problem here, there are tons of trees in the way. So it's basically a beautiful but obscured view. Let's take a look at the view through my iPhone in video mode and I'll talk about it a little bit. First of all, bear in mind that we are in video mode, so this is going to be in 16:9 wide aspect ratio. And you can see the mountain's really cool, the town looks really nice, but there's this big tree in the foreground. Driving around here, around this corner specifically, it really looked like I was going to be able to find an area to shoot through the trees. But getting out of the car and walking around, there's just too much stuff in the way. Even if I go down here or out on this little railing, this little concrete platform, these big trees are still in the way. So there's no real clean shot I can get here. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to get back in the car and I'm going to keep driving. The idea is to go higher up on the road, and this road will switch back and forth, and hopefully I can find a better view with less trees in the way. The idea now is to keep driving up and see if I can find an unobstructed view. Normally I wouldn't mind some trees in the foreground. Bear in mind in the summer, they'd be nice and green. In the fall, they could be beautiful colors. But right now, I'm not a huge fan of just the dead trees. So I want to find a place that I can see through those and just see the town and the mountain itself. I think I'm reaching near the topmost vantage point and I'm looking out here to the right and it's starting to look pretty good. And what I'm going to do is find a safe place to pull over and I'm going to explore a little bit more on foot. Right here where I parked the car, it's a great place for parking, but unfortunately, there's too many trees in the way to see the town. When I was driving up here though, it really seemed like I had some clear spots. So what I'm going to do now is scout a little bit of the road on foot, just in case I missed something when I was driving. I have to admit the spot seemed much closer until I parked the car and actually walked down here. And from the car, this spot looked much better, but now standing here, it's not as good as it originally looked. And the reason is, there's really only this small window to capture the town. Not only that, I'm closer to the town itself, even though I'm a little higher up. Now the town itself is kind of compressed. So I'm looking down the length of the buildings. I really wanted to see the buildings across the mountain, not all compressed together. Let's take a look through my camera and I'll show you what I mean. So here's the view through the video app on my phone. Again, keep in mind this is 16:9, so we're not going to get a normal 3:2 frame that we would out of the camera, but it'll still give you a really good idea of what I'm looking at. First thing is, in order for the shot to work, I'd have to zoom in. Once I zoom in, framing just the mountains in the town, there's still a lot of stuff in the foreground. See the road down there, those buildings, the dead trees? It still doesn't look that good. So even if I crop in, I don't feel like this is a portfolio shot. I also think that I can find a better vantage point. This was a little misleading because I thought I could see more clear spots in the trees a little bit further around, and that would have spread the town out a little bit more. But this is the clearest spot I've found so far. So what I want to do now is try the last road that I can think of. There's one more road that'll take me out around, away from the town, not quite as high as this, but I think it may give me the perspective I'm looking for. Scouting with the car was an excellent idea. I was able to cover quite a bit of ground in a little bit of time. Now, the last spot that I stopped was a little bit further up. I thought I'd come out here, drive around this road, and see if it revealed the town in the correct way. I do like this spot, but it's not without its problems. Saying that, I think we can work with it. Let's take a look at this through my camera's view so we can talk it out. So here we are. This view looks pretty cool. I have a lot of the town here, and as I pan slowly to the right, you can see I still get the mountain. Pan a little bit more towards the right, and you can see I have somebody's apartment down there. So there is another road down there, but this is all residential, and it seems really busy. I know we'd disturb people if I went down there. Plus, if I look down, you can kind of see there are a lot of trees in the way. So I don't think the view is going to get any better down there. And from up here, if I wanted to frame something a little bit like that, and actually using a wide angle, the other issue is if I move up and down here, you guys see that wire? There is a telephone wire right in the way. That's not a deal breaker for me. That is so easy to clone out. What I'm really looking at is the overall view. So I can crop the town on the left before it gets into the trees, and I can crop it on the right before we get to the apartment. So I think I'm going to try to make this shot here work. Now that I've established the spot, it's time to go ahead and set up the cameras and get ready for the right time to take a photo. Right now, the light is pretty bad. The shadow is creeping up the town, so it really isn't shootable. Even a couple hours ago, when the town was lit completely, I don't really think it was that interesting with the blue sky. It's a beautiful location, really nice to be here in person, but for a photograph, I'd either want some beautiful sky drama and light in that sky, or in this case, I think I'm going to wait for the blue hour and see how the town lights up. Based on the research I've done with this town, I know the town lights up beautifully, but I'm also pretty sure that there'll be some light on the mountains as well. So as it starts to get dark and we enter into a mid-blue hour, this could turn out to be a really beautiful shot. The plan now is to go ahead and set up the camera, then seek the warmth of the car, wait for the right light, and then come back out here and capture everything I'm going to need. So here I am, all set up in the location that we've chose. Now, I'm still not 100% happy with the shot, but I think we can make it work. It's really going to come down to a little bit of post-processing though. In this camera, I'm shooting wide. In this one, I'm shooting medium. In the wide camera, I actually have 2 wires running through my shot. In the medium shot, I actually only have 1. But either way, that's going to require some cleanup. Now, right now, I'm set up. It's still a little bit early. There's still that harsh shadow on the town. In a little bit of time, once the sun starts to set, that shadow is going to climb all the way up those buildings, past the mountain. It's going to illuminate the mountains in the background until the sun sets all the way. Once the sun sets all the way, we're going to transition into an early blue hour. And then what I think is going to happen is during the mid-blue hour, we're going to get enough light in the town, and we're going to still have enough light on the mountains to get a beautiful shot. What I anticipate happening once I get into post-processing is that I'm going to like the early blue hour for the mountains in the background and a later blue hour for the town. The reason being is during the late blue hour, I really feel like these buildings are going to pop from the background. But at that point, the mountains themselves might be too dark. This is very similar to the previous lesson. Both cameras are set up, 2 different perspectives, both set to interval timer mode. This time I'm shooting every 1 minute because I want to capture all the subtle changes with the blue hour and the lights from the town itself. So while these 2 cameras are running, I'm going to seek the warmth of the car, and I'm going to wait until the end of the blue hour, and then I'm going to pack it up and call it a night. Right now, you're probably noticing 2 things. One, I'm in the car, which is great because it's super warm. But the second thing, if you look behind me, it's also getting really dark out. So I'm going to wait a little bit longer in the comfort of the vehicle until it gets full dark outside. Then I'm going to pack the cameras up and drive to our next destination. Next time I see you guys, we'll be in post-processing. We'll be able to look at all of the images I captured and find out if we're going to use a single frame for the shot or we're going to blend different phases of blue hour together. Welcome back to the post-processing studio, everybody. We're still in the Little Dolomites, and as you saw with the lesson, I was actually scouting everything from the comfort of the vehicle. So I had a couple cameras in my face, and I was driving small little Italian roads. We were lucky. It was the wintertime, and we were the only people on those roads. So it was actually kind of fun, and to be honest, that is a way that I tend to scout a lot of locations, especially these mountain towns. And that scouting, though the lesson itself was only 10 or 15 minutes, we probably scouted for 3 or 4 hours. And with the light falling so fast in the wintertime, sunsets around 5 or 6 o'clock, you really have to make the best of your day. Now, don't tell anybody, but the F-Stoppers guys, they like to sleep in a little bit, so we usually don't get started until about after lunch. So that was a really good opportunity to drive around Castelmezzano and find a really good vantage point. Now, saying that, I had no idea if we were going to find this vantage point, but we did. And the shots that I took, remember, I shot one that was wide and I shot one that was zoomed in. So the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about both versions, the wide version and the zoom version. And this time I want to examine whether I'm going to crop or I'm going to use one of the native straight out of camera crops. So let's go ahead and open up Lightroom. Now, we're going to take a look at the file that's associated with this lesson. So when you open up Lightroom, it's going to look exactly the same. Now, I have a couple shots let's take a look at here. This is an early blue hour shot with the X-T2, and around the same time, here's the shot with the X Pro 2. And you can see that it's zoomed in quite a bit. Now, that's a dramatic difference. And you can see from here to here is a dramatic change. And it's also a different format. We're shooting in 3:2, so it's our standard native format from the camera. But I kind of feel like this is too wide and this is too zoomed in. So with an example like this, what I'll tend to do when I decide, or if I can't decide whether I want to use the wide shot or the zoom shot, I'll actually do some test cropping on the wide one. So I just want to take a look at this and see, you know what, if I had my way, what would be the perfect composition? So inside of the crop tool here inside of Lightroom, it's pretty easy. You can lock the aspect to the original or you can use some custom aspects. And let's use something that's normal, like 16:9. 16:9 is like this video that you're watching, that standard video format. Another good format is 16:10, and it even gives you a pixel aspect ratio as an example. 1920 by 1080 should be no surprise. It's most films that you're watching on TV and Netflix, things like that. 16:10, 1280 by 800, that's more of a monitor resolution. So it's a little bit taller than 16:9 and tends to look pretty good. So I'm going to pick a custom size. Now, a lot of people feature art prints that are 16:9, 16:10 more wide. So let's just see what that kind of looks like. You see it just crops a little bit on the top and the bottom. If I go to 16:9, 16:9 crops a little bit more. So it's wide and sort of ultra wide. Now, I like to pick a format first and then kind of crop in and see what I'd like. So let's go ahead and see at 16:9, or actually let's go 16:10. Let me figure out what this composition would be. Now down here I kind of like this road, kind of like the house, but I feel like there's a lot of junk down here on the bottom, especially these trees. Not really necessary. The other thing is over here, I'm not a big fan of these trees on the left, but I feel like I want to keep a little bit of that white house. So I think something more along the lines of this would be something that I like. At least I think right now that's something that I would like, right about there. So I'm going to hit enter on this. And now I'm going to take a look. Okay, I cropped a little bit off of that, or do I like the zoomed in version? Well, the zoomed in version looks completely different. Now what I like about this wide version is we can really see the length of the town along the mountains as the mountains move out through this and create a nice compositional element. And this line of the road also leads through and creates an additional compositional element. So in this case, I'm not going to use the zoomed in version, and I'm going to crop the wide version instead. But before I do that, I don't want to crop in Lightroom. So I'm going to go ahead and reset this. We're actually going to crop in the end. Now, I don't want to crop right now. I'm going to show you guys a way to crop in Photoshop where you can actually save the pixels. Because right now, if I crop this and I export this to Photoshop, it's going to export it cropped. So what if I change my mind later? Then I'm stuck with a cropped scene. So what I like to do is, I know I'm going to plan to crop. I still edit the full image inside of Photoshop, and then I crop later, just in case I want to change it. What if I want to do something square for Instagram? What if I want to do something with a completely different format? I'm going to want all those pixels so that I can crop later in a different aspect ratio. So let's leave that for later, and let's talk about the settings. First thing is, let's go here, and I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to make sure that I have this set, the noise reduction 20, just like that. And you know what, we're only going to use a couple files here, so I'm just going to manually change that here. Now I've reset each one of these things for you guys. By this time, this should be pretty standard to set this. Now again, experiment with your own settings, see if there's something else that you can come up with, but make sure they're all uniform for the blending. So I have a couple different files here. I have this first one here. This is an early or mid blue hour. And I'm going to go ahead and scroll up to the details here. And as I cycle through here, this is a mid blue hour followed up by a late blue hour. Now a couple things happen here between these two files. One, town looks really nice, mountain looks really nice, but this wire is completely illuminated. The other thing is these trees look horrible. They look a little bit better here. So what we're going to do is blend these two the way that we've been blending them. We're going to use this as a base, and then we're going to follow up the highlights here to get that mountain back. And we're going to make sure that we do not add these trees. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to take this file to the left, and we're going to use this sky. It's a little flat right now, but we'll chisel out the details momentarily. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is edit some basic settings. Start with the exposure. Let's bring that up about a half a stop. That looks good. Let's add some contrast back in here. Actually, quite a bit. Let's maybe 25% contrast. Now, nothing's really blown out. If I hit J, I get just a little tiny bit, but I want to go ahead and pull the highlights down just a tad, maybe 15%, and the whites as well, just a little tiny bit. The other thing I want to do is I want to warm this entire scene up. So let's go ahead and do that here by changing the temperature here. Instead of in camera, let's warm it up, and that seems about too much. Let's make it an even 10K. We'll go ahead and leave the tint at 15. This will be a subtle adjustment. Let's go ahead and export this, and my export settings should be the same as the last lesson, so export with previous. Here in Photoshop, let's go ahead and get started renaming things right away. We're going to call this adjusted mid blue hour. Let's go back into Lightroom and talk about our second shot here. For this one, I just want to crank the whites down quite a bit because you can see that they're a little overexposed. Remember, this is going to lighten over the top, and 50 should be fine here. Let's make it even. The other thing is I want to match the white balance. Remember, that was 10,000, and plus 14 to plus 15 won't make that much a difference, but we'll go ahead and change it and export again, once again, with previous. I'll select all, copy this one out, and paste it on top, and we'll call this adjusted late blue hour. Now that we have both layers, we'll set this to the light and blending mode, and I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here. Now, I'm not too worried about the sky because I'm actually going to replace the sky. That's going to be the next step, but let's go ahead and take a look at this. So, definitely like the mountain. Do not like the trees. Kind of like the town. In fact, let's figure out at what point I like the town. I like the town right about there, actually, which is somewhere between 30 and 50%. So what I'm going to do is put that to 100%, and I'm going to create a black mask. And I'm going to brush this in completely custom here. So we're going to go ahead and start with the mountain. I want all of the light from the mountain. Let's just say that I want some of it down here on these trees, very softly. You can see just those trees down there, just a little bit. And then I'm going to brush in some on the town, just a little bit. So we're going to custom paint in this extra light. We'll put some more over here on the edge of town, and right about here. So this mask is going to look slightly soft in the center. That's exactly what I want. And if I turn it on and off, that looks pretty good. Looks like I missed some areas right here. Turn it off and on once again. Make sure I got everything that I wanted. Perfect. Now, we can all agree that we don't want any of that. That is very, very distracting. So it looks pretty good. Let's just check that one more time and add a little bit more up here. And definitely get this light here on the side of the mountain. Now, if you shift-click this mask, we can see exactly what it'll look like without any masking. You can see how intense that town becomes. But if there's anywhere I forgot, for example, the lights on these buildings, things like that, now's the time when we're doing the blending to sort of add these things in. Little things like that. So it's really good to kind of click this on and off and see if there's anything worth noting or worth adding that looks pretty good. We'll leave this for now. We're going to go back to Lightroom. So we already worked with this one. Now let's talk about the sky. Now obviously, it's just our luck. 4 days of nothing but rain, and then pretty much a clear sky. So we went from one extreme to the other. So while I would have wanted some more cloud drama than this is actually pretty good. And since we already decided we're going to crop, the sky has some nice compositional elements as well. But this is really flat and dull, And so is this, just a little flat and dull, but you can see there is some texture in the blue hour, so we're going to have to come from here, get the sky in from here, and blend it into the blue hour, because I have a feeling we can bring and crank up the potential of the sky and give it a little bit of color, but it needs some adjustments first. First things first, let's pull those highlights down just a little bit. Let's add some contrast, maybe about 10%. And you know what? I think we can go ahead and add some vibrance. Too much is going to be a little too intense, but if I probably leave it right around 30 to 40, say 35 right in the middle, it's actually going to start to bring some of that color back. Next thing I want to do is add a elliptical selection. See how this part of the sky has a little bit more color? This is sort of blue into pink, a little bit of yellow, then back into blue. I think I can isolate that. So let's just go ahead and isolate that section first. Now, it doesn't look great. Let's go ahead and invert it so that happens inside of the mask, and turn the exposure down to 0 to begin with. With that selected, let's go ahead and warm it up a bit. And you can see I'm bringing that color back. Not too much, just a little bit. And we'll go ahead and change the tint just a little bit as well. So something subtle just like that. I'm just going to move it around to position it so we have it right around that area. Don't worry too much about the mountains, because we're going to take care of that inside of Photoshop. So we added a little bit of color. Let's go ahead and back out of that. Now let's grab the gradient selection tool, and let's do a little bit more to that sky. First thing, select it, zero out the result. What I'm going to do here is just add a little bit of dehaze, and you can see that that's going to pop the sky details out. Not too much, maybe 20 to 25%, somewhere in between, just like that. And I can make adjustments to this. See if I want it to be a little bit more subtle throughout the sky. That looks pretty good to me. So basic adjustment here, everything looks pretty good. The vibrance, contrast. Let's see what happens if we add a little bit more contrast. Up to about 15, pull the highlights down just a little bit more. Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and export this result. Now that we have this, let's go ahead and select it, copy it, and paste it to the top. We're going to call this sky. Perfect. Now, I need to check something though. It looks like this may have shifted a little bit. Let's zoom in and see. Yes, this actually has shifted a little bit. I have no idea how this shifted, but we're going to have to take care of that. So there are a couple ways to do this. Now, it looks like it only shifted a pixel or two. We were sitting in the car for a while, so I have no idea. That could have been wind. It could have sagged a little bit in the dirt. It could have been any one of us that could have just nudged the camera ever so slightly. But there are a couple ways. If it's slight like this, we can change the opacity to about 50%. And as you start to nudge things, you can kind of see those edges. But this is really, really slight, really minor. So let's go and change this opacity back to 100%. For things that are this minor, I like to use something like a difference or exclusion. So in this case, difference. See that white edge right there? That's actually showing us the difference of the edges. So you'd never use this blending mode unless you were doing something for like a 1980s rock album. I would not use this for anything else but this. But it allows you to nudge a little bit. And I went to the left, see how it's off? But if I go to the right, see how that white edge disappears? That's actually what we want to see. So around here, you can actually see that it's a little bit better. So it was here before. You can see that white edge, and now it's actually back. So this is a way to adjust that and just sort of hone in on how that moved. I have no idea how this moved 1 pixel, but it did move 1 pixel. All right, so we're going to change that back to normal and back this out so we can take a look. Now, we don't want to use normal, obviously. We want to use something else. We're going to use lighten. And with lighten, you can see that it does a fairly good job. It's adding a few things here in the town, which we're going to get rid of. The other thing is here, right here. Pay attention to this part of the sky. See that cloud? It's actually causing some issues. If I set it to normal, you can see that the sky is correct. But rather than having to make a mask for the edge of this mountain, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Let's go ahead and create a folder. We're going to call this Sky Blend. I'm going to move this layer in here, and I'm going to call it Sky Lighten. I want to change this mode to the Lighten mode. Here on the blending folder, I'm going to create a mask, move over to the gradient tool, and I'm actually just going to paint it out, just like this. simple, just like that. And it looks like I'm getting something over there on the building, so I'll just go ahead and paint that out manually. Perfect. So now we have the lighten layer. Let's double that up, duplicate it, Command J, and sky lighten will become sky normal. And we'll change this blending mode to, you guessed it, normal. See how I did that with the name? Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a mask for this, a black one. Option clicking will achieve that. And I'm going to manually brush these, well, let's just call them issues, because that's what they are. I'm going to use a brush, a white brush here. And let's go ahead and paint. So you can see I can bring that right back in. No problem at all. Very, very easy. And this saves you the hassle and the trouble of having to isolate that with a luminosity mask, an inverted blue channel, or, heaven forbid, a manually drawn lasso. So let's just go ahead and bring all that back in. Now, the other thing is I want to make sure that I get the entirety of the sky, because I want to make sure that there is no edge happening there. Perfect. Toggle this on and off, and you can see now I get my sky back. That looks pretty good, actually. And it's definitely, you know, it's not the best sky. It's a pretty good sky. But the easiest sky to put into an environment, the easiest sky replacement, I should say, is a sky from the exact same composition, because you get the same edges. So if I brought in a sky from anywhere else, any other sky that I shot that was similar in tonality, that would help, but I'd still have to overcome these edges of the mountain. So this way, with that blending mode, I can just throw this right on top, and it works perfectly, because everything, all the pixels actually, for the most part, even though they shifted, all line up. It's actually a pretty nice blended result. Let's go ahead and select this. I'm going to use Command G for group, and we're just going to call this blended result. But I don't know. Can you guys see any objects there that may need, I don't know, removal just a little bit? Maybe there's a wire or two or three, unfortunately, that need removing. Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. And I knew going into this, looking at this shot, that this was going to be tricky. Now, I think, I haven't done it yet, but I think this is actually the zip line here that goes across that high line right there. I believe that these are just power lines that are running between the town, and unfortunately there are a couple of them, so we're going to have to get rid of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the easy parts first, then I'm going to walk you through the more difficult parts, and then we're going to fast forward through the rest of it so you don't actually have to watch me clone every bit of these wires out. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing is I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. We're going to call it Object Removal. Now, it would be great if we could automate this entire process, but we can't. Thankfully, though, some of this is pretty, you know, dull geometry already, so we can just use the heal tool. And as I say that, don't hold me to it that it actually works, but it looks pretty good. It looks pretty good. Not bad, anyway. I think I'm going to have to touch it up a little bit, but I think, no, that looks bad. And so I kind of get away with some of it here. All right, so this area is going to be fairly simple. For the rest of it, I'm going to use the clone stamp, and I'm actually just going to go in and paint in similar detail. Now with this infinite loop here, we can go ahead and get rid of that rock as well. Nobody's really going to notice some of the repeating texture, so we'll call that easy. Even easier is this up here in the sky. Now for the sky, I'd recommend definitely using the heal brush, because it pretty much knows, and as I say that, it doesn't work at all. Oh, I can tell this is going to take a while. We actually want to get rid of some of these wires, and I think because there are two parallel wires, it doesn't really want to do it. But if I go out to here, I feel confident at some point, come on, heal brush, please save me a little bit. Please save me. Yeah, it's going to get rid of some of that. And if I do a larger brush, it'll know. No, it won't. Wow. Okay. So if that starts to happen, if content aware doesn't fill, if content aware starts to fail, we can actually try a couple other things like proximity match. And we can just see if our proximity match works. No, not so great. A little bit better, but not so much. So it looks like we're going to have to do this all. We can either call it the hard way or the fun way. So this wire removal is going to be a clone stamp adventure, which is going to look something like this. We're actually going to grab, when similar, parallel to the sky, we're actually going to go in and paint this out little by little by little, just like that. And if we can get some of this to work in between, I would love that, because that's going to save me a lot of time. If not, I'm going to do it all with the clone stamp, and we've used that quite extensively so far. The other difficult areas are going to be around the town itself. So while I can go ahead and quickly do some of these areas, even paint out things that, may or may not exist, like, and what I mean by may or may not exist, I have no idea what that part of that person's yard has, so if I just go to the edge, nobody's really going to notice. In fact, if I leave some of this wire, you could say that, you know what, we may not even notice that that wire is in front of the house, but if we want to do a really good job, and photographing the world is about doing a very good job, we actually have to go in and, you guessed it, have fun. I wouldn't worry too much about that window. If there's 2 windows on that house, it's Italy. There can be 2 windows on a house. Same thing here. I'm just going to start grabbing these edges and painting them in just a little bit, just like this. So little by little, piece by piece. Now thankfully my vertical lines are fairly parallel and fairly clean, or else this would be much more difficult. In other words, if these lines were not straight, I wouldn't be able to just follow them, but I can actually just go piece by piece along this house and have a pretty good grip on it. Same thing here on this side, the home. Down here, I can actually grab any of this color here, and it's close enough. I just want to make sure that I don't grab too much of that other color. And if I toggle this on and off, you can see that's starting to be removed. Now obviously these parts are going to be easier. Parts along the roof, I'm going to have to zoom in a little bit here. Follow the edge of the roof, just like that, just to get rid of this. Now thankfully along this roof, this tile is fairly repeatable, and if I use a soft brush, I think I'm using, 20% flow on this. As long as I remove parts of it like this from the facade of the building, as I come over to the roof, just like this, you can see I can get rid of it. So I still have to do the in-between, but you can see that the building was definitely the more difficult part, and I have a lot more to do. Rocks like this, see this nice edge, this little detail? Not so bad. And what I'm actually going to be able to do is just follow that same detail. If I get rid of some of the other details on the rock, it's not that big of a deal. Now, it's cool because this detail's random already. Like, this is basically a facade of a rock, so it's not like it's a building. If I put the rocks in the middle of the town, then actually somebody might notice. Okay, so this is going to be really time-consuming. The sky hopefully isn't going to be as time-consuming. And let's go down here and check this other wire out. This stuff is really interesting to me because we know we're going to crop some of this, but what if we don't want to crop it? What if we end up wanting to use the whole thing? Well, here's going to be quite a pain. Like, here is probably going to be the worst part. I'm going to have to find, first, part of this branch, like this, and continue it. Not so bad, but the detail in the trees here, again, the easiest thing that you can do here, since it's not incredible detail, is to grab something that has soft detail and softly brush it in. And then as you get closer to an object that you need to maintain, then grab that object like this, make sure it aligns with it, and clean it up. And then you can just kind of go in and brush that softly. You can see before and after. Now, again, we're very lucky, even though this is in the tree line here, it's not a tremendous amount of detail. So as long as I grab some of this detail here, nobody's going to be able to tell that those branches don't completely line up with each other. And unless you tell somebody, don't tell anybody. But it's pretty easy. Pretty easy. But very, 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 very time consuming. So at this point, we know what we need to do, and I challenge you guys to do this on your own. Put some music on and just kind of get through it and make sure it looks as clean as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and save this in the background. So rather than make you guys watch every single bit of this, I think this is at least going to take me 20 or 30 minutes. We're just going to speed right through it and take you to the next step. So here we go. Well, that was interesting. I wouldn't say it was fun, but it was definitely interesting. And the other thing that I noticed while doing this, it's interesting that the shot that was one of the easiest to put together and has the simplest of compositions required the most technical work for the object removal. So I did not expect that. Well, with all that being done, it's time to take the next few steps on this image. Next step, and we can just kind of look at that, the before and after. All of those wires are gone for the most part. I may have missed a little bit here and there, but forgive me, I was trying to rush through it. So let's go ahead and take this blended result, use my favorite hotkey Shift, Option, Command, E to create a new layer, rename this Adobe Camera Raw Filter, because once again, we're going to go up here to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Now, as I said, this is a pretty simple scene, but I want to marry everything together by just warming it up a little bit. And I can do that, and quickly you can see when I go too far, everything here turns yellow. So 10% seem to work pretty well. The other thing I want to do under Effects here is dehaze it. Let's go ahead and dehaze until it starts looking bad as well. I'd say 20 is about as far as I want to push that. Now I want to address one thing. By warming everything up here in the town, I've also manipulated the yellows themselves. That was not my intention. So thankfully we can go over here and we can change it. Now when I said yellows, let's see how much of this is actually yellow. Well, actually yellow's on the facade of the buildings. Well, you know what? Visually this looks a little bit more orange, so let's slide that, and yeah, that actually is exactly what it is. So I'm not trying to remove all of the saturation, because if I did that, you can see we lose it completely. Luminance is kind of cool, so it's just going to brighten or darken it. And if you darken it, you can see how bad that looks. But if you add a little bit of brightness, maybe even just 10%, you can see how that's going to tweak it. So it's going to remove that warming that I put on the layer by adding the temperature right here. Let's go ahead and take that and apply it. Alright, so first things first, that looks pretty good overall. But I'm not too happy about warming up the sky. I like the dehaze that I added, but I want to keep the softness on the top here and that soft blue. Let's go ahead and paint this in selectively using a mask and the gradient. Let's go ahead and stop it from about here to here. And you know what? Let's go ahead and make that a little bit more broad from here to about here. And let's just take a look. That looks pretty good. So I'm still getting some of the extra warmth here in the sky, some of the contrast, all the contrast here on the town. But I feel like the town has gotten a little too warm. So what I'm going to do to offset that is use a photo filter. And I'm going to use one of the cooling filters. I'm just going to check these, because between 80 LBB and 82, you can see I'm looking for a more natural result. And I'm going to be really subtle. So this one looks pretty subtle, actually. We're going to turn the density down to something about 15%, just like that. So you can see that town changes just a little bit. Let's pull this down just a little bit more. Something important is I'm using preserve luminosity, and you can kind of see the difference before and after. With preserve luminosity, sometimes it will actually bring up the values a little bit, bring the luminance of the values, and in this case it helps because I'm actually trying to bring the luminance of the facades of the town up as well. So we're going to go ahead and invert this mask, paint it in selectively on the town, just the town. That's all I'm trying to cool down. I want to leave that warmth all around it. Now it's important, with the balance of a scene, we have warm tones here, cooler tones mixed with warm tones, and then we have cool tones in the sky. So it's kind of creating depth with cool and warm layering techniques. So let's just go ahead and cool that town down just a little bit. That looks pretty good. And we're just going to call this, you know what, we'll call it Cool Town, because it probably is a cool little town. And the next thing I'm going to do is bring in a hue and saturation layer to mitigate a little bit of that cooling that we did. So let's go to the blues and let's bring the lightness of the blues up just a little bit. Really what I'm looking for, and it's probably better if I go ahead and zoom in on this so we can see it a little bit better, is these values that are almost blue already. So let's just go ahead and grab the rest of the cyan here, slide this around, and you can see as I tweak this, if we're able to select any of those colors at all, and it looks like we're not really getting a lot of result from there to there. Even if I select more of this into the cyans, you can see that
those blues aren't really being affected that much at all. So in this case, sometimes it's sort of a perceived color that we're getting rather than something we remove. So a lot of the time, and you can see it kind of here, just a little bit we're actually able to grab. So visually for me it looked like I needed to remove a lot of the blue, but there's just a subtle amount there. So it's going to be up to you. This is really where you need to get in there and figure out if that 5 or 6% makes a huge difference. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So I'm just going to say blue reduction, just like that. And we're going to go ahead and zero that out. Back this up, and it's pretty safe to say that we can just use 100% on that. Slide that down, paint that in. That looks pretty good. Not too bad, not too bad. Let's also bring it in here. Maybe we can get rid of some of that blue on the road itself. So let's take a look at those two together. Okay. That actually looks pretty good. I've cooled that down on my Cool Town layer. I'm actually just going to bring that down to about 75%. The next thing I want to do, we'll go ahead and back this out again. I want to add some deep contrast. So we'll leave all of these intact, and in the channels what I'm going to do is create a midtones mask. So we're going to create a new layer here, a new mask. I'm going to invert this, Command-Shift-I, create one more, so we have highlights and shadows, and with everything selected I'm going to remove both. Click on the OK, go to layers, and I'm just going to add a curves layer. With that curves layer added, you can see that I'm going to get just, I'm going to get that mid-tone mask. And if I option click it, you can see it's coming to life right there. So here, what I want to do is just add that deep contrast here, and I'm actually going to tweak those highlights and midtones just to give this a little bit more vibrance and life. Now, that's looking pretty good. Let's just call this midtones. Midtones. We can always pull this mask and add it to another layer if we want to later. What I want to do here, though, is I want to chisel out some of the details of the mountain manually. And I'm going to do that using a traditional dodge and burn layer. So if I click Create New Layer, well, yeah, I get a new layer. But if I hold Option and click New Layer, I get some options. So first thing, I can call this Dodge and Burn. Dodge and Burn really works well in landscape photography. And since this is primarily landscape, let's go ahead and use it. Now I'm going to set this mode to Overlay. And I'm going to fill Overlay with neutral color, 50% gray. And what's going to happen, I'm going to get this Dodge and Burn layer, and nothing's going to happen. Well, that's because with an Overlay mode, everything that's 50% gray is invisible. Everything else overlays. So if it's brighter than 50% gray, it causes a highlight. If it's darker, it burns in a shadow. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it means that we can go in here and just with the paintbrush tool and a very low flow of 10, or even you see 5% up here, what I can actually do is start following the edges of these mountains like here and painting in highlights. So you can see how that was a little bit too much. So I want to, with a very soft brush and a very low flow, just lightly paint in some of these highlights. And what I want to do is find the edges of the rocks. I'm just going to go in and chisel out some of these highlights and details. Even here in the lighting, I can actually bring lighting up around the surrounding areas. So let's say this is actually illuminating part of the town, or the town itself is illuminating part of the mountain. So with dull images like this that require a little bit more attention, this gives you the ability to custom build some of the highlights in the areas. So we should be getting a little bit more ambient light from the sky around these areas and these here. We can just find the natural contours of the rocks. So this is a nice way to just paint in selective highlights. You could, in a lot of cases, redistribute the light balance of an image. You don't want to go that far. You just want to accentuate some of the areas that should have more attention. And in my opinion, these little dolomites should get more attention than they do. So we're going to do that visually just by painting in a little bit more light. Now obviously there are so many combinations of this. Now I've just been painting in highlights, so let's go ahead and let's zoom out a little bit and let's see if there's anywhere else that I want to add some of this. You can see I can add more highlights to this area, this part of the mountain itself, to bring that out. Down here I can actually bring up the highlights of these trees just a little bit. Down here in the town I can bring out more of these values down here just to redistribute that light a little bit down here and overall on the mountain. If I swap the palette to black and start painting, I'll actually create more detail in the darks, or actually remove detail by darkening it. So it's burning this color. I don't really want to burn too much color. I'm really more concerned about bringing and lifting the values, because I feel like if we go back to the right channel here, colors, you can see that the distribution of light, there are a lot of shadows and midtones already, but there are very few real highlights. So let's go ahead and pull that out just like that. Zoom out and take a look at the dodge and burn, the before and after. That's actually pretty cool. So here I can keep doing this and basically get it just right, exactly how I want these mountains to look, right around that detail. Keep toggling it on and off until I get it exactly how I want. Definitely love these mountains, love this countryside. It looks really cool. So from here, I'm just going to go ahead and save in the background. Let's go back to Lightroom. And this is our original file here, so I'm going to go ahead and reset this one and export it with previous. Use unique names. And we're going to bring this in. And I'm going to bring this in here. On the bottom, we'll call this original raw. Perfect. Let me just double check the few adjustments that I've made here. That looks pretty good in the midtones. Something else that I might want to do here is, I like this deep contrast, but I'm not too happy with it here on the bottom. So I can add a new midtones layer. And let me just go ahead and do that by selecting this and creating a new curves layer here. And we're just going to call this midtones boost. Now, what I just want to do is just bring up some of the values from the bottom of the frame. So I'm only going to look down here while I do this. So we're going to add contrast and a little bit of detail down on the bottom. Now, this is really interesting because right now, I didn't apply this to a folder, but I want to show you guys how to do something else here that's really interesting. So right now, if I use the gradient tool, I'm going to get a solid gradient on this mask, which is something that I don't want. But if I change the mode, just like we've been using different color modes, to something like multiply, for example, and I actually say that, you know what, I want this to happen from the bottom, so it's going to paint white to black from here to about here, what I'll actually get is a multiplied result. So I can actually change this from here to about here and just pick up the bottom of the image. So now I'm only applying that just to the bottom. So it's easy to just crank up some of these values just like that. So we call that midtones boost. That looks good. Now I brought in the original raw now because now I want to actually crop this image. Remember, I didn't want to do this in Lightroom. It's because I wanted to show you guys a specific tool in the cropping options. So right now you can see I already have that set to 16 by 10. We can set it to original ratio, and if it's set to original ratio, it's going to bound you to that ratio. So it's going to keep that at 3 by 2. Now, that's okay. A lot of the times people want to do that because 3 to 2 is a very popular printing aspect ratio for images. Everybody's kind of used to it. So if you're going to crop and you want everything to be uniform in your portfolio, it's good to conform that. But you can also write in your own. So here's a bunch of the random ones that you can use, and 16 by 9 is there. But if it says 16 by 9, you can actually change it to 16 by 10. Just like this. Now, what I want to show you guys is this. Delete cropped pixels. By default in Photoshop, this should be enabled. I always disable it. It gives me the ability to crop an image, but it saves everything outside of that crop, just in case I need to go back and make changes later. If you do that in Lightroom, export to Photoshop, then make your changes, go back to Lightroom, you don't have all of that available. So it's a really powerful way to save the crop into the file, but keep everything outside of it. So we're going to keep this, challenge ourselves at 16 by 10, and let's go ahead and create an interesting composition. So I really do want, I don't want this apartment complex to be the first building that I see. I kind of want part of the white building, just a little bit. I like the bend of the road here, but I'm not too happy with all of this. And there's actually a little fence here that I'm trying to take attention away from. Let's go to about here. I'm looking at the way the mountain kind of goes down this way. Now, let's go ahead and crop in a little bit more. Here's what I'm really looking for, is using sort of the attention of these 4 points for the rule of thirds. I'm not a huge fan of the rule of thirds, but this kind of does make sense. I'd like for this part of the mountain to fall in sort of this target ratio. So the important compositional points in the rule of thirds really are around the center, these 4 points. So if I just make subtle adjustments, it doesn't have to be exactly on it, but if I just move it a little bit here and a little bit there, you can see that I can get something that's compositionally pretty nice. And then I can just make small adjustments to it, just like this. And that actually looks pretty good. If I hit enter, it will crop the image. Now though, with my cropped result, look at this. See how there's this little thing down there and there's this little thing right here? If I want to change this, if I had cropped this and deleted the pixels, I would have had to undo it. But now what I can actually do, with the crop intact, using just the standard selection tool, I can take all of these layers and I can actually nudge them inside of this. So if I hold shift and start nudging, you can see I can move this around. And I can just grab all these and also move them around. Very easy like that. So now I can just make small adjustments to this until I get the exact cropping that I wanted for this image. Small adjustments. We'll bring in some more of that sky. Not crop the bottom of that house. Get a little bit of the bend in the road in the bottom. And that looks pretty good. So we have a new cropped 16 by 10 wide angle image of this town. Just like usual, let's go all the way down to the bottom. And let's take a look. We have the raw, all the adjustments, the blend. We did some dodging and burning for this one. Adjusted the midtones a few times, blue reduction, some overall warmth in the scene. Here's what it looked like straight out of camera. Here's our before image. And here is the final edited result. So a lot going on here if we take a look at it before and after. Well, that wraps up this lesson in the post-processing studio, and probably the biggest takeaway for me on this one was that even though this scene was really simple, the cloning was actually the most complicated I've done so far, even more complicated than the stars. I felt like there was more detail I had to go around the roofs and everything. I think it was a really unique challenge. So it goes to show you that even when you think everything's going to be simple, sometimes there's still obstacles that can get in the way that you need to overcome. Next time I see you guys, we'll be back in the field and heading to one of my favorite places in southern Italy.